Good evening. This is Tony Barletta, Town Administrator. It is 6:02. I'm going to wait another couple minutes here and get started right at 6:05. All right, it's 6:06. Again, my name is Tony Barletta. I'm the Town Administrator for the Town of Nahant. Thank you for all those participating in this meeting and for those tuning in via the live feed on your local TV channel. This is the first of two, actually the first info session related to the town meeting, I provided at a community breakfast at the Nahant Village Church earlier this month, or in April. And so this is the first of 2 info sessions that I'm presenting via Zoom, and really meant to be informal. So for anyone that's logged in on the Zoom, feel free to unmute yourself at any point during the presentation. You know, like, again, I really want these meetings to be an opportunity for you to ask questions, learn a little bit about, you know, the process and the articles, some of the hot topics, and it's an open forum for any other things that I may have missed. You know, walking through every single article, I think would be quite boring. That being said, if there's an article that you have a question about or want to discuss, I'm more than happy to open up the warrant on the screen and go through, you know, any of those articles if you'd like. So with that, I'm going to share my screen to PowerPoint. Town meeting this year is going to be on May 20th at 12:30 at the Nahant Town Hall. Check-in starts at 11 a.m. It's a Saturday, not this weekend, but the following. I'm sorry, yeah, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. I want to talk a little bit about the process of preparing for annual town meeting. This process starts months ago in December, even in November a little bit, but in December is really when it kickstarts. And we start by preparing the omnibus budget by seeking requests from our departments and our committees, looking at what their current budget levels are at for the existing fiscal year that we're in, looking at what they were appropriated in previous fiscal years and what they spent, and really requesting from them what type of increases or reductions or capital requests that they might be looking at for the upcoming fiscal year, which starts July 1st. And in January, citizen petitions and committee requests for warrant articles are due by the end of January 31st. That's per our town charter. And from January to April is really when the bulk of the work is happening. And a lot of it is by your elected and appointed volunteer committees, inclusive of the Community Preservation Committee, the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and others. The Community Preservation Committee receives and reviews applications for CPA funds through this time period from January through April. And the Board of Selectmen simultaneously are constantly making adjustments to the omnibus budget, making adjustments to the warrant, either editing or adding or deleting different items that have already been in a previous draft. And we're sharing that information with the Finance Committee. An interesting fact is that the Board of Selectmen actually control the town meeting warrant. However, the omnibus budget is the Finance Committee's document. So while we draft an omnibus budget, myself, town accountant, department heads, we work together to develop a draft omnibus budget. The selectmen review it and approve it. We then send it to the Finance Committee. Ultimately, they have the ability to make changes as they see fit, and it's their budget that is voted on at town meeting. The warrant, any articles for the warrant are determined by the Board of Selectmen, unless, of course, citizens petition is submitted timely with enough signatures by January 31st, and then that citizens petition is automatically added to the warrant exactly as it was delivered to the town hall. And in this year's case, we have a citizens petition in our warrant that was submitted timely regarding short-term rental committees and short-term rentals. And I'll get into those details more as we go through the presentation. In May, right now where we are, the report recommendations of the Advisory and Finance Committee is required to be delivered to the household of each registered voter in Nahant. We've been starting to receive those books here at the town hall, so you should have received it as well. But if you haven't, it is available on nahant.org under the annual town meeting page. All information, all documents related to town meeting can be found there. So building the omnibus budget, the way that I look at the most important article for us to vote on is the omnibus budget. The town's finances are in very good shape. We've done a very good job at sticking to the priorities that were set forth by the Finance Committee and the Selectmen back in 2018. And all of those priorities were based on recommendations from the Division of Local Services at the Department of Revenue. What we do every year is we start by predicting what our revenues are going to be for the upcoming fiscal year. So what funds are we going to bring in? Because that's really going to dictate how much we can spend. When we're talking about municipal finance, the money you raise in that fiscal year is the money that you're spending in that. It isn't like, it's not like the money we raised in this fiscal year is what we're going to spend next fiscal year. It all occurs in one 12-month period, July 1 to June 30th. So as I mentioned, we'll start by looking at what our revenues are going to look like. Most of our revenues come from property taxes in the town of Nahant. We also have a significant amount of funding that comes through free cash, and I'll explain that as we go through this presentation. We look to the department heads and committees to make those budget and capital requests. We start our budget by funding the priorities, as I talked about a moment ago, at their minimum amount. And at the end of, once we work with all the department heads and look at all the capital requests, if we have additional funds at the end thereof, we'll come back to these priorities and see where we can maybe do more. So our debt service payments, we know going into the fiscal year how much we're going to owe on debt in the upcoming year. Our stabilization, we've committed that we're going to fund stabilization as a priority every single year, and we've done that over the last, as I said, since 2018. Stabilization is like a rainy day account. Money carries over from year to year. In order to spend it, it requires a 2/3 vote of town meeting. So building that account up is very important and crucial for a town's bond rating and ability to plan for the unknown. OPEB, or other post-employment benefits, is another reserve account that funds retired employees' benefits, and we're required to fund it. Our ability to contribute to it on an annual basis also is factored into our bond rating on an annual basis. And before I continue to the next bullet point, when I am speaking about a town's bond rating, it's very similar to that of your credit score, your personal credit score. So if you ever want to go and borrow to buy a house or to buy a car, what the first thing they ask for is your credit score. And that credit score is built up off of, your ability to make payments on previous borrowings, what you have for income, what you have for savings. It's very similar on the municipal level, where for you it's a credit score, for us it's a bond rating. The better the bond rating, the lower the interest rates are going to be when we go to borrow funds in the future. So after those reserves, we look at what our contractual obligations are. So any type of employee contracts, union contracts, service contracts. A service contract could look like what we owe Lynn Water Sewer, or similar. That's what the next bullet is: assessments. So the school, what we owe the Swampscott Public Schools, water and sewer. So MWRA. What we owe the treatment facility. So understanding how much are we going to have to raise in order to pay those assessments off or pay those contractual obligations. And then utilizing free cash to fund one-time expenses. So free cash is very similar. The way I like to compare it to is like a Christmas bonus. At the end of your calendar year with your job, you might receive a Christmas bonus. You might get a bonus at the end of the year. You don't know if you're going to get it every year, and you don't know how much it's going to be. So it's really not something that you can budget an ongoing expense with. If you got a let's say a $5,000 bonus, you might go on vacation, and use that $5,000 that one time, or maybe you, remodel a room in your house or something of that nature. What you're not going to do is buy a car that you're going to owe a monthly payment on for the next 5 years, and really be banking on that bonus to come in play in the next 4 years in order to pay that off. That would be, it's not a responsible way to budget for the future. So for us, same thing, free cash is like that bonus. So what it really is the combination of unexpended appropriations. So let's say in a previous fiscal year, we voted that we were going to spend $100,000 on professional services, and we ended up only spending $80,000. Well, that extra $20,000 would fall to free cash because we didn't spend it, we didn't need it. It would fall to free cash for a future year. It also it's money you don't end up spending, but it's also additional revenues that you didn't predict. So similar, if we predicted we were going to bring in, $50,000 of building permits, and we ended up bringing in $100,000. That's an extra $50,000 that we didn't account for. And so the combination of those two amounts, what we didn't spend and extra revenues we didn't predict, they combine and are available for the town to spend in the future fiscal year. That's what free cash is made up of. But again, according to Department of Revenue and Division of Local Services, you really want to spend that on, a one-time capital expense, paying down your debt, or building up some of those reserves. You really don't want to use those funds to pay, employee contracts or benefits or things that are going to be an annual expense year over year. So in going through that process, the result of that process is the omnibus budget that we have presented for the upcoming town meeting. We have really minimal increases in our operational budget. It's a simple 3.5% increase. And really that's where most of our revenues are, most of the revenues that fund our general fund appropriations come from property taxes. Being, less than 4% increase is really our sweet spot and where we aren't getting into any type of financial trouble. So a 3.5% increase is very healthy. And it represents just about $357,000 compared to last year. As you can see, our general government went up about 50 grand. Public safety went up about 136,000. School went up around 79,000. Public works around 36,000. Cultural and recreation. This is actually a little bit of a decrease, primarily due to the elimination of appropriating funds for military housing, because we expect to be selling that property off. So we will no longer be managing it, and therefore there won't be a cost to pay for the management of it. And insurance and benefits, we definitely saw a pretty significant increase in the insurance and benefits account. So we have to, really manage the whole budget as a whole, and we're seeing some categories increase significantly because of those required payments. Our water sewer enterprise is actually seeing a decrease, and I'm happy to report that for the second year in a row, our sewer rate is not going to change at all. So it's a level funded sewer rate for 2 years in a row now. We understand the strain that utility bills can be on our residents, and so we're trying to do whatever we can to keep those costs under control. Our rubbish enterprise, our trash, is an area of focus after town meeting. Our waste management assessment increases about 4% on an annual basis, which is really, that's a global effect. The cost of household waste and recycling is just skyrocketed over the last 4 years or so, and that's what we're kind of seeing that here locally as well. So after town meeting, we'll be having some public meetings to talk about, policies and ideas on how we could potentially, limit those increases on an annual basis. As I mentioned, appropriately using free cash. So 100% of our free cash, which totals around $993,000, is being used appropriately and for those one-time expenditures, or funding capital projects, or replenishing other reserves. And by replenishing those reserves, that too is helping our bond rating. And as I mentioned about stabilization, this year's budget includes an appropriation of $200,000, which, if approved, it'll bring our stabilization fund to $870,000, which in 2018, when I first came on board, I think we were somewhere around $130,000. So in just a few years, we've been able to increase that stabilization fund exponentially, and we're going in the right direction. We also, again, will be appropriating $25,000 to the OPEB fund, bringing that up to 128.5. And again, in 2018, I think there was only $3,000 in that account. So we've significantly increased the balance in that account as well. So utilizing free cash appropriately limiting the increases in our operational budget, funding our reserve accounts, and then lastly, paying down debt to save long-term costs. So in the omnibus budget that's being presented, we have a total debt appropriation of $2.3 million, which is actually $654,000 above the minimum amount due in the upcoming year. So by doing that, we're going to be able to pay off short-term debt before it automatically becomes long-term debt and triggers higher interest rates. So significant savings for the town, short and long term. Before I go to the next slide, does anyone on here have any questions about the omnibus budget?
I do.
Yeah.
How have you, what has been the strategy for increasing the free cash reserve fund? How have you managed to do that? What is it, yeah, I'm curious.
Well, you really don't want to, you don't want to increase it too much. Having too much free cash isn't a good thing either. Certainly having a free cash deficit is a really bad thing. So you want to be somewhere in the middle. It's been, the last few years has been, it's really been hard to nail down a trend because we've had other funding sources through ARPA funds. And we've had this reduction in revenue with the Coast Guard housing, which is significant. And then we have new revenue coming in with local meals tax and short-term rentals. So we've really been, I think my first year was around $700,000 was the free cash amount. And we've been trending around, $800,000 to $900,000 in the last couple of years. So it's not by way of a goal or something that we've been attempting to do. It's just been a product of COVID really had an impact on our spending. And so not only did we reduce a ton of spending because we couldn't do as many activities and things really kind of slowed down, but on top of that we had ARPA funds supplementing our government expenses. So where our biggest focus was public health, a lot of the funds in public health weren't being spent because we were able to spend ARPA funds instead. Does that answer your question? All right. So I want to just highlight some of the important capital articles that are featured in this year's town meeting. Article 16 is Council on Aging kitchen. This is for $50,000 to be spent on the kitchen. We have existing funding. The current kitchen is very antiquated. It's old and tired, and it's actually in the town hall and really needs to be built. The CPC awarded $50,000 for this project in a previous year. The state actually awarded us $50,000 in grant funding in the current fiscal year, and the Friends of the Council on Aging have dedicated $13,000. So with the additional $50,000 from this year's town meeting, our budget will be around $163,000 total, which is enough to do the project that we're seeking now. We've already met with contractors and price checked a lot of this. The Council on Aging kitchen serves about 30 elderly residents every day, Monday through Friday for lunch. Extremely active, department and does a tremendous job. If we're able to complete this project, not only could it potentially allow for an expansion to the Council on Aging, but it could also be, we could consider, the space for rentals as a community kitchen. We have a lot of residents in town that are chefs or bakers, but don't have a public health approved kitchen, so they can't actually bake or cook and then sell their goods out of their own home. But a community kitchen would allow them to rent the space, and then it brings in a little bit of revenue for the town as well. But certainly the priority here is to serve the Council on Aging. Yes, Ellen, just go ahead and unmute yourself. And that, not just for you, Ellen, but anybody on the call. Again, I want this to be as informal as possible. Hard to do, but
okay.
Just unmute yourself.
Well, I was late, so I didn't. I was a few minutes late, so I didn't know what the rules were. My question on this is, so the approval is just for the new 50, right? The existing funding is existing. CPC gave their 50 last year or the year before, and these other grants have come in. So the question is, in terms of the project, has there been a consideration for what you will do to continue to serve the needs of the residents while this, assuming it's passed? What will you do for a kitchen in the meantime while it's under construction, if it's serving that many people every day?
Mm-hmm. Our director, Mary Miner, has already reached out to Nahant Village Church, Swampscott Council on Aging, a couple of the function halls in town, and we have a couple different options that we're still working out. It won't be, if this passes, we'll have some time to really iron out those details. It won't be right away. So we have a couple options teed up so that there is no gap in service. That's a good question. Thank you. Article 18. This is another big capital item. These two large dump trucks at the DPW are two critical pieces of asset for our fleet. They not only do serve an important role in our snow removal operations, but mostly for our underground utility projects, removing earth, bringing in new material, or whatever other supplies we might need for those types of projects. These are the two vehicles that we have in town that really allow for us to do those projects. And the biggest challenge in today's market is that there's such a lead time for these types of vehicles, and the prices are just growing by the day. We have an existing fleet schedule that, like a multi-year capital calendar related to fleet specifically, and we try to rotate, through all of our vehicles, so that we're not going to town meeting asking for, the whole fleet at one time. These are due for replacement, and the beauty of it is that they have, the DPW has done such a good job at maintaining these that even though they're due for replacement, they hold some pretty good value. So by trading them in with their current value, we're going to save about $100,000 on the cost of the new vehicles, the two new trucks. And we also are going to use half of the funds to purchase we're going to use ARPA funds. So by using retained earnings and ARPA funds, we're not borrowing at all for these two huge, major pieces of equipment. So there's no interest involved in these purchases. Where typically, if you were doing this, you'd have to borrow and pay the interest off over time. As you can, I'll read the quote from our superintendent. Due to the current industry trends, purchasing 2 new large dump trucks now with the current trading value of our existing dump trucks and the delay in delivery of new vehicle purchases, it is prudent and fiscally responsible to make this effort in fiscal year 24. By utilizing ARPA funds for half the cost and retain earnings for the other half, the town is able to make these significant purchases without adding any debt burden to the taxpayer. So it's actually timing up. I give credit to the DPW for maintaining those vehicles, so well that they're in a position to, save us money on the new purchase. So again, that's $150,000 of retained earnings, and the other 150 is going to come from ARPA. This slide is a list of the community preservation articles. Every year we have a number of community preservation articles featured at town meeting. Our match percentage from the state has been growing and growing. We've been able to accomplish a lot of good things with this program. It really is like a lifeline for the town, because a lot of these projects, we wouldn't have the funds to take on these projects otherwise. So the CPA is a great program that funds historic preservation projects, open space and recreation projects, and housing projects. Article, I'll just highlight a few of them. 21B is Flash Road Pickleball. So this is the Flash Road basketball and tennis courts. The tennis courts would, if this passes, we would add permanent overlay of pickleball lines, which would allow transform the tennis courts into a dual use facility. So you could either play 2 games of tennis at the same time, or 4 games of pickleball at the same time, or any combination of that. So it's a large number because there's lighting is included in this, temporary nets, painting, wind and sunscreens, and a number of other items. Again, if we don't spend all of it, if we don't need to spend all of it, we don't, and it stays. The community preservation committee will, pull the money back into their account for future use. So these numbers are really like a not to exceed them. 21D, Fort Ruckman, Bailey's Hill restoration. For the town, we've already done a lot of work there. If you haven't been down to Bailey's Hill or Fort Ruckman, I really encourage you to do so. The trail system has completely been revitalized. The area there is in really great shape, and I really encourage folks to take a look. We have more work to do with plantings and invasive species removal, but this grant would help continue those projects moving along. We just repaired the garage at the bottom of Tri Mountain Road, new roof and painting, and so we're really cleaning up that whole area, an area that's been somewhat neglected, but really needed some shine, and it's going really well. Lodge Park East Point restoration. This grant application is the product of a study that was actually funded through CPC last year. So the town hired a professional to come and take a look at Lodge Park and make recommendations for restoration and management. And those recommendations are featured in this article. Again, it's similar you know, invasive species removal, plantings, you know, signage, any types of related items like that. All of this, by the way, all the details of these can be found on the town's website under Community Preservation Committee. 21F is Kelly Greens tree plantings and pedestrian bridges. Kelly Greens has, you know, lost a lot of willow trees over the last few years, trees that have been there for many, many years. So we'd like to replant new trees. You know, the planting of new trees not only does, you know, great work for our ecosystem, it provides protection for the, you know, the abutting recreational areas, provides shade for those, you know, playing golf. And it, you know, that it helps with the stormwater system as well. The pedestrian bridges, we did a study last year for lowlands drainage, and you know, one of the recommendations was that the stormwater ditch system that goes through the golf course really needs to be improved, and perhaps some of the underground piping removed and having those open ditches restored, which would require, if we were to do that, new pedestrian bridges. We also have a pedestrian bridge that's been, you know, over Bear Pond. You know, I don't know how long it's been there, but it definitely needs some work. So these funds would also go towards repairing that bridge as well. 21G, town rights of ways. Rights of ways have been a topic of discussion for the town for quite some time, dating back to I think probably 2 or 3 town administrators. We're seeking to continue the project of doing title research on all rights of ways in the town of Nahant. I really look at this project as a 3-phase approach. You know, you want to do your title research, then you want to be doing on-site surveys, identifying exact locations of the right-of-ways, and then thirdly is making improvements or dealing with encroachments, you know, one by one. The coastal rights of ways in Little Nahant have gone through phase 1 and 2, slowly going through phase 3. The rights of ways in Big Nahant, only one section of Big Nahant, I think, went through title research. So our thought was, let's get all the title research done for the entire town and then work on phase 2, you know, making progress on phase 2 in a future year. The last 3, IJK, those are all debt service amounts for bond borrowings that were approved in previous fiscal years for envelope restoration of the library, town hall, and the cemetery. Any questions about Community Preservation Act? All right, I'll move on. Article 23, police bylaw, feeding wildlife amendment. This article has really was sparked in large part due to rodent issues and coyote issues. The town actually has bylaws in place regarding household trash and dumpsters at restaurants and things of that nature, making sure that, you know, trash are in sealed containers and that they aren't just left out on, you know, in bags on the street or you know, potentially attracting wildlife. But what we don't have anything about, you know, feeding of wildlife, intentional feeding of wildlife, which is a huge element of our coyote issue in our town. So what this article, again, you can get this article on the full language of this article on nahant.org. But really what this is going to allow the town to do is if we have a number of sightings or activity related to wildlife in a certain area, and then we go and investigate that space or that area of town and determine that there's a food source in the area, we will actually be able to, correct that with having this bylaw in place, where now we really don't have any bylaw to cite that someone is doing, something illegal, or, we can just basically just have a conversation with them about the importance of, not doing that, and enticing wildlife to be in the area. This article does not make bird feeders illegal. That's been a question that's come up in the past when I've talked about this. It absolutely does not do that. Certainly if we were to, if we found a bird feeder to be the source of wildlife activity, we'd be able to approach the resident and talk to them about, the importance of having the appropriate type of bird feeder. But this article absolutely does not make bird feeding.
Tony, can I just ask can I ask a clarifying question about that?
Sure.
Stuff. What actually, I guess, what activities, I'm unaware of activities where people are intentionally feeding wildlife. Is this really trying to get at unintentional feeding of wildlife, or am I really out of the loop?
It's both. We've definitely had intentional feeding of wildlife in our community. I don't think any of that has ever been associated with coyotes. As you can see on the screen, there's definitely a lot of feeding of birds, with bread or, whether it be ducks or seagulls or things of that nature. And so that can be an issue. But yeah, there's unintentional feeding of wildlife too, where you might leave a bowl of cat food out on your porch for your outdoor cat, but wildlife doesn't know that it's not for them. So those are some examples. But yeah, I don't, as far as the coyote issue goes, for the most part, I would say our town does a very good job of following the guidance that, we've put out over the last couple of years. I went for a walk with our public health agent and our animal control officer a few weeks back or a month ago, after reviewing a lot of like common sightings in similar areas, and we didn't find anything. We found a lot of the residents in that area, even residents with chicken coops, very, very responsible, making sure that that the coops are very locked down tightly, and the feed is as well. So it's I gotta say, I don't, it's not that we have a lot of intentional feeding going on in town. Most of it's unintentional. So the last two Article 24, 25, there's one more article after this, which is continuing committees. It's an article that we have every year. But these two articles are probably the hottest topics, the hottest topic to be featured at this year's town meeting. There's Article 24 was presented by the short-term rental committee. The short-term rental committee was created by a previous town meeting to look at what other towns have already adopted, to hold public meetings, and to recommend an article for a future town meeting. Article 25 was a citizens petition. As I mentioned earlier, when a citizens petition is submitted to the clerk, we have to put that entire citizens petition in the warrant. We're not allowed to make any changes or even summarize. Exactly what's submitted gets in the warrant. So when you look at your book, you're going to see, not much detail under Article 24, because that's a summary article in the warrant. The long version of what the short-term rental committee is proposing, you'll find in the appendices. And they're proposing a general bylaw amendment and a zoning bylaw. And then when you get to Article 25, you'll see the entirety of their article there in the warrant. Again, it was a citizen's petition, so we have to put their entire petition in the warrant by law. Things to know about these articles is that the town currently does not have any zoning or general bylaws specific to short-term rentals. The state law allows municipalities to regulate. It does not allow municipalities to prohibit. So, a lot of what I've heard through the public meeting process and other avenues is, do we want short-term rentals in Nahant or not? That's not what is presented at town meeting. That is not the vote that you're going to be taking at town meeting. Towns are not allowed to prohibit short-term rentals. We are allowed to regulate. So right now, it's completely unregulated. So regardless, I think what's really important for the town is to pass something related to short-term rentals, because currently there is no licensing at the local level. There are no regulations, and our zoning really doesn't speak to it specifically. So we want to get something passed, and there's some distinct differences between Article 24 and Article 25. And there's some similarities between the two. Both articles limit the total number of short-term rentals to 4% of the housing units, which equals 64 currently. Based on our current housing stock, 4% would mean 64 licenses. The two major differences between the short-term rental committee proposal and the citizens petition are, one, in Article 24, requires that non-owner occupied short-term rentals have to also apply for a special use permit through the ZBA, whereas owner occupied and owner adjacent short-term rentals are allowed as of right. Now, all three of those categories would still be required to get a license from the town on an annual basis. Well, would be required to get a license from the town. The Article 24, the short-term rental committee, did not include the word annually. However, in speaking with them, it was their intent. They allow for the Board of Selectmen to develop rules and regulations, and I believe that should it pass, it will be a requirement annually for all short-term rentals to get a license from the town. But again, non-owner occupied, meaning a property that is not your principal address, you would be required to get a special permit from the ZBA before attempting to get a license from the town. Article 25 says that all short-term rentals, whether you're non-owner occupied or owner occupied or owner adjacent, you're allowed as a right. You do not need to go get a special permit. It too requires that you get a license from the town, but there's no special permit process involved. Excuse me. Article 24 sets the framework for licensing regulations. However, it allows for the Board of Selectmen as the licensing authority to promulgate those rules and regulations related to short-term rentals. Whereas Article 25 proposes a number of rules as part of the general bylaw. So the Article 25 presented by the citizens petition, through the citizens petition, excuse me, really lays out all the details of those rules and regulations as part of the general bylaw, which, it's a good set of rules and regulations that they proposed. There's a lot in there that I think the short-term rental committee may have somewhat grasped with their general, framework for the future reg. And definitely things that have been discussed throughout the public meeting process. However, as a general bylaw, changing those rules and regulations in future years would be much more difficult. You'd have to go to town meeting for a vote to make any changes. We're so early in this process, the short-term rental committee felt that it was important to have those specifics in regulation so that the town can adapt as we see how these rules and regulations get applied, where they're effective, where they aren't, and really kind of adapt as we go. Those are the two biggest, differences between the articles. Michelle, I saw you had your hand raised up a moment ago, so as I grab a sip of water, hopefully you'll unmute.
I will. Thank you. And thanks, Tony. Thanks for hosting this for the residents. This is fantastic. And I hope more people take advantage of the other dates that you have available. Regarding the two articles on short-term rentals, has there been any further dialogue whether friendly amendments will be proposed to adjoin them and come up with a unified article that will make it simpler for the residents to agree and vote on?
So we've had some discussions with the lead petitioner of the citizens petition. It's kind of been an ongoing discussion. I wouldn't say we're there yet. It's possible.
Plenty of time till town meeting.
Yeah, it's possible that we won't get there. I would say that the citizens petition or the petitioners are definitely supportive of rules and regulations, and they want to see something get passed as well. Their biggest, I guess, the special permit requirement is where they differ mostly, just because of the additional timing that could go into that process, the potential for appeal and need to defend an appeal at a higher level of land court. Pretty legitimate concerns, I would say. But that being said, I think that they, the petition, they don't want to see nothing get passed. I think that they actually are, for the most part, we have very good hosts in our town. We've had, a couple issues here and there. but it seems as a lot of the hosts or owners of short-term rentals, even the non-owner occupied, have some sort of connection with the town of Nahant. They have a tie towards Nahant, and they know what the character of the town is, and they respect that and want to, and that's why they put together, such a descriptive petition. In fact, I think, because the petition requirement was due by the end of January 31st, they kind of were nervous that the committee wasn't going to have something prepared. So they wanted to get something on the warrant as a just in case. But yeah, they do have, obviously there's that one element of the special permit is a sticking point, but we're going to continue to talk with them, and hopefully something passes at town meeting.
So I have another follow-up question to this. So since we have two articles, requires a 2/3 vote, correct?
Yeah.
What happens if they both pass?
Well,
And I know Dan's on, so.
Dan, if you are by your computer and want to unmute, that's going to be a challenging issue if both pass, and how the Attorney General responds to that is still somewhat of an unknown. But
Okay.
Dan, do you want to attempt to answer that?
You hear me, Tony?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can attempt to answer that. Okay, so if both pass, I know in your case, Tony, that's not the worst case scenario. In my legal sense, that is the worst case scenario if both pass, because bylaws, like general laws, are meant to be in accord with each other. So if both pass, then we would have to go through an analysis as to which of these particular bylaws agree with each other versus disagree with each other, right? And I think you're right in that the special permit process is the biggest district, but there's still all the other things that need to address underneath that. So it would be the AG will review this and say, well, consult town council as to which disagree or agree with each other, and then we work. Right? I think that's the worst case scenario. But so Tony's trying to avoid that. We had a call from 2 hours ago with the fellow from the business position control, and I think we're on our way to the original resolution.
Michelle, did you get all that?
I got most of it.
So we don't have a definitive answer.
I guess we'll just have to wait and see. It's going to be, no, that's fine. And I didn't expect we would either. So I think we're where we need to be right now. We just need to make sure we have quorum at meeting, and hopefully people come with open minds to debate both of these articles. I think they're worthy of it.
Yeah, certainly. At the community breakfast, there were a ton of great questions about short-term rentals, and I encourage people to, attend these info sessions, or I'm going to host, as not only am I doing this again next Monday night, but this Friday and next Friday from 10 to 12, I'm going to hold open office hours for anybody that, might want to stop by and ask a question about, whatever's on the town meeting warrant. A lot of those questions, I get the same question, similar questions over and over again, and a lot of concerns about, the impact on our community. And, in what I've, tried to say is, whether you're in favor of short-term rentals or you're not in favor of short-term rentals, attempting to pass one of these articles is in your favor. You want to, we don't have, right now we have zero regulations, zero licensing. So if you're on either side of the aisle there, I think, we getting something passed and then working, there's no reason we couldn't, discuss it again at a future town meeting or work our way through the regulations over time to get it right. But, getting something done, I think is the most important piece of this issue.
Mm. Well, thanks again, Tony, and thanks for all your work. It's certainly appreciated.
You're welcome. That is, that's my slideshow. That concludes my presentation. So, unless anybody on the call has any questions or comments, we'll close the hearing or close the informational session. Like I said, I'll be doing this again at 6 o'clock next Monday night, and this Friday and next Friday from 10 to 12 o'clock at the town hall. I'll be hosting open office hours for anyone that has any questions or wants to discuss any of the articles to prepare for a town meeting vote on Saturday, May 20th. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good evening. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Tony.